Let's explore some insights and perspectives in Genesis chapter 26 and 27. I've mentioned in the past that the Bible is a bit like a foreign country. They do things differently there. And it's helpful if we enter into this foreign country that we take the time to understand the text from the perspective that it was originally preserved and heard by its original audience. It doesn't mean that we shouldn't read the text today for personal enlightenment and discovery of principles of the gospel that we can apply to our lives. But sometimes, particularly with the Old Testament, we have to be a little open to the fact that what was going on in the Old Testament, in the lives of the people here, may not always represent the very best of gospel living. In fact, you might look at the story of some of the patriarchal families, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and their families as, and excuse the term, a bit dysfunctional. You might look at some of the things that go on and say, I certainly wouldn't want that going on in my family today. And so we might want to be a bit empathetic about their circumstances, that these were real people dealing with challenges of everyday life and doing the best they could to try to bring about goodness and happiness, even though sometimes they did things that we might feel, well, maybe they could have done better. Maybe they should have been a little more honest. And I share this because sometimes we read this, we might feel a little disappointed in the actions of these illustrious people that we revere, but who didn't always make the best choices, and sometimes the stories seem just slightly dysfunctional. This doesn't mean that the Bible isn't true, that we can't look to the scriptures as sources of truth and wisdom. Again, we just want to make sure we take the time to listen to the text on the terms it's coming from, and then see how we can glean stuff for our day. And be empathetic with the fact that the culture of that time was just different than ours. So let's move on to Genesis chapter 27. Now here again, we have this interesting story that might suggest a bit of dysfunctionality in a family where you have a younger son who is plotting with his mom to get access to blessings or resources that are, by culture, intended for the older son. So here's how it works in the ancient world. The oldest son is supposed to get the greatest amount of blessings. The idea is that the father will have a certain amount of land, and the oldest son will get a double portion. One portion will take care of the son, the second portion will take care of the parents in their old age, and then the rest will be divided among the other male inheritors. And Jacob is the younger son. Esau is supposed to be getting this double inheritance. And it seems that Rebekah, his mom, favors Jacob, and she plots with Jacob to trick Isaac into giving the blessing, the cultural expectation of the double inheritance to Jacob. And what's interesting about this is I personally don't think this story was preserved in the Bible to recommend to any one of us that we should be tricking family members out of inheritance or whatever it might be. The story is preserved, I think, for a variety of reasons. One, it is partly an explanation for how Jacob got his double inheritance. It also plays upon the name of Jacob in Hebrew, which means a supplanter, that eventually Jacob supplanted Esau in having access to the double blessings. Another reason this may have meant a lot to the Israelites who would hear this text read to them and would want these stories preserved in their sacred national history, which is the Bible, is that it tells them the power of the underdog, that God can support the underdog to win. If you look in the scriptures, there's all these stories in the Old Testament of people who shouldn't be expected to win, ending up winning through either God's intervention or the person's wits to outsmart others, or both God intervening and the hero basically outwitting a stronger character. You see it here in the story, or Esau apparently is stronger than Jacob, but Jacob uses his wits to equal the playing field. You have the story of David and Goliath. I mean, we all love an underdog story. And it's interesting, in the ancient Israelite culture, they believed it was appropriately fair to change the rules of the game when one person was more powerful than the other to make an equal playing field. And look at what David did. David actually did not show up to the fight with sword and shield, but he came and changed the rules of the game by using a slingshot. And there he actually equaled the playing field, actually the battlefield, and actually conquers the giant. So the underdog wins. And again, we can look over and over again about how the underdog wins. We get in the story of Joseph, who overcomes his brothers through eventually love and grace and forgiveness to be the hero of the story. Many other examples in the Old Testament where the underdog, either through God's interventions or that humans' smartness and tact, figures out a way to equal the playing field to actually win at whatever the contest is. Now, why might this have mattered to the ancient Israelites? They lived in a very small country surrounded by massive empires, like the Egyptians and the Babylonians, the Assyrians. They were perpetually the underdogs. So you can imagine as they're listening to these stories, these sacred stories being told generation after generation, and they're living in an underdog society, it reminds them that even though society seems to be unequal and not fair, that God understands it. And even those who don't have as much as perhaps they deserve, or perhaps the underdogs, or perhaps they were born into circumstances that weren't fair, God can find a way to bring them up, to exalt them. Or they can work through ways to actually get themselves to a spot where there's more equality. And it's an interesting way of looking at the world. Now, perhaps we might not want to absolutely enact everything we see going on in the Old Testament, but we can understand for these ancient Israelites why these stories meant a lot to them and why they would hand them down from generation to generation to the point that we have them, and we can understand that these individuals were trying to work out their own salvation with fear and trembling, and sometimes doing it in ways that perhaps we might feel was not the best way of doing it. Yet, we can ask ourselves, how am I doing? Am I actually looking to the Lord when I feel like I'm in unequal situations to help me to grow and develop? Am I helping to lift up others when perhaps things are not fair for them? Am I helping to do the Lord's work to level the playing field so everybody can have an opportunity to flourish and to benefit? These are just some of the lessons I think we might take from these interesting passages in the Old Testament.